Welcome back. Now, from today's class onwards, we are going to see decision support system at work. Let me tell you, from this class onwards, though I do not assume any background, I expect that at least very simple mathematical things you will be able to understand. And wherever possible, I will be giving additional explanation as well, or directing you to sources using which you can learn more. So, in this lecture, we are going to in couple of lectures, couple of few lectures, we are going to look at a new data source which has result because of the web transaction with the user, and how this particular data source is used in understanding the user behavior we are going to discuss about it. Not only user behavior and other allied decision making situations, we are going to see that. So, to start with, let us try understanding what is this data source. This data source we call as web log. So, let us try understanding what is a web log. So, in this lecture we are going to learn how the web logs are generated, the structure of the access log, various pre-processing tasks and session identification. So, these are the 4 things we are going to learn. So, to start with, we first of all need to remember the access log, the HTTP protocol that we have learned while discussing about the technologies. So, whenever any web transaction happen, as a client sitting in front of the browser, you send a HTTP request. So, this HTTP request when you send this HTTP request, like you send it in the form of either a GET, where you request the server and get some data, or it is in the form of a POST. By POST we mean along with the request for getting the data, we are also sending some parameters. Think of a web form, we are filling up a form, and this form we fill up. To forget about a form, think of a search engine. You send the search parameters. There is a different, it is two different situations when you, let us say, access IIT Kharagpur website. You simply write the web address and you get the content, and everybody will be getting the same content. But in case of a search engine like that of Google, you have to provide your search parameter. So, that is a kind of POST, but anyway we are not going to discuss the details, but this discussion is primarily necessary for understanding the structure of a web log. Okay. So, when you send the request, you send it in the form of a GET or a POST, and when this particular request over the internet is sent to this HTTP server, HTTP server generate a response back. Okay. So, when it sends the response, when it gets the request and sends the response, in between it does a number of tasks. Based on the user's query, it try to fetch a page. If the page is a dynamic page, it tries to connect to the database and try to fetch some data. If the page is connected, a page has some embedded resources like that of your images or videos or something of this sort, or audios, videos, those things also are sent along with the page, and all this information is sent back in the form of something called a HTTP response. The HTTP response, usually the HTML file which comes back, it is the HTML file that contains the content of the web page along with many other stuffs. Like here, look at this, here HTTP 1.1 200 OK, 200 it is a response code, it also sends one response code. So, here the 200 means it is responding back and the page is there and it is sending the page, it is a success. If the HTTP request is results in a successful response, it is 200. So, you have, in fact, you must have seen 404 page not found, which is also a HTTP response code. So, after you get this, during this request response process, not only the data comes in, but your request is broken into the sub requests for the embedded resources. For, let us say, for images, let us say page contains the text, image, some 2 images, then all these comes to the client side and they are, browser combines them to make the complete page. So, this is the request response model. Okay. Now, in this time, in this process, when the request and response come, there are always certain time delay, which is called the round trip time. And if you remember, we were telling HTTP is a stateless protocol. So, before we even talk about the whether HTTP is a stateless protocol or not, before going to that discussion, let us try to understand the nature of this IP and this address that uniquely identifies each device. In fact, while talking about this, we said IP address is something which uniquely identifies one entity over the internet. Fine, it uniquely identifies the entity, but it is not that straightforward that we were talking about. In fact, all of us connect to the internet using certain internet service provider. As an organization, we have our own LAN, and when we connect to the outside world, which is beyond our LAN, outside network which is beyond our LAN, for the security purposes of the whole organization, all the computers are not exposed to outside. In fact, all of us get connected to outside within an organization through some proxy server. So, when the data packets are routed from each customer whose may be one individual customer or one organization, all of us actually connect to the internet service provider's router, and ISPs themselves may be maintaining a number of routers and they may be connecting to another ISP, and all this happen because might be happening through certain proxy servers. Now, in this process, the IP address that from which you have sent the packet, let us say sitting in my department computer, I have sent some request. It is going to first my institute proxy, then it is going to one of the ISP's server, maybe ISP has its own proxy, through few proxies of ISP it is going to some another transit ISP, and going through many such transit ISPs, finally the packet reaches at the destination. So, which means the IP of my actual IP which is visible to me in my own network is not the IP, because the address translation takes place so many times in between. By the time it reaches the host, reaches the web server from which I have requested a page, my IP address is different. So, when the response comes back, every time the address translation takes place in corresponding proxy servers, and the address from which the data request has come, to that the response is sent back. So, in this reverse process I am definitely getting the response, but my exact IP which is supposed to be my unique identification is not exactly known to the server. In fact, what are we talking about? We are talking about the server log files. Server log files get generated due to user interaction. So, what we have understood so far is the server log files do not reflect the exact IP of the user. It shows the IP of the last ISP through which the request has come. So, this is somewhat little problematic. Second is, a website is not always accessed by real human users. There are entities called software agents and crawlers or spiders who may be accessing your website and getting the data back. In fact, if you look at a search engine like that of Google, it will be actually employing a huge number of web crawlers to download the data, to collect the web pages, prefetch the web pages from the web server. So, if your intention is to find out the user activities from the log file which contains this HTTP request and response, instead of human users, this crawler requests may surface. So, if you are really interested to know the activities of your human user, you have to get rid of this crawler activity. This also makes your access log data erroneous. Now, this, as I told you, this site navigation data of the real users or the crawlers is stored in the server itself in some log files. There are many log files, and important among these are your access log and error log. This access log has different formats and different kind of formats which your web server you have to customize within your web server, but we are looking to look at few common type of log formats. Typically, a log file will have a look of this type, where each entry for each of the request there will be each of the page request there will be more than one entry. By more than one entry we mean when a request is sent for a specific page, the request is also sent for its embedded resources. So, naturally in the response not only the text file which contains the data part is downloaded, your other embedded files also get downloaded. So, one typical request can result into a number of large number of responses depending on the embedded resources. This is the typical fields in a web server log. It shows the date that the activity occurred, the time when the activity occurred, the IP address of the client, which in fact we discussed that this is may not be the reflecting the true IP, the name of the authenticated user who access your server, and so on. You can read them out. In fact, of these few important ones we are going to look at. In fact, first is your IP address. This IP address is actually provided by the ISP. Then you have this username. It is determined by, if there is HTTP authentication by chance, this name is determined. Then you have date and time. Then you have method. I was telling you about this get and post business, and the method can be either get or post. Then the URL which is getting downloaded, then version of the HTTP protocol used, then HTTP status code. In fact, we saw in one of the examples, earlier examples, the status code basically indicates whether it is a success or a failure. If it is a success, what kind of success, if it is a failure, what kind of failure. In fact, if after the status code here, which is in this case, in this particular example, here status code is again 200. It tells the size, the total number of bytes transferred by the server to the client, the number of bytes transferred. Then it also shows the referrer. By referrer we mean the web page from which the request has come. This web page can be one of the pages of in your website. Let us say on page A you have a link to page B. So, if you click the link, you will be sent page B, but your referrer will be page A. Then the user agent. This user agent is basically the type of browser, type of browsing agent that you are using. For example, here it is Mozilla. Now, once these access logs are collected, in fact, they are automatically collected. See, this is we were talking about the big data, right. Big data is something which is generated very frequently. So, if you have a website, your company has a website which is very frequently used by your visitors, the visitors will continuously come to your site, and with each request the data is going to get generated. So, you have huge amount of data getting generated and stored in this text files which are called access log, error log, etc. So, once you collect this data, what to do with this data? This data is huge amount of data gets generated continuously. They contain all these details that we discussed. But what to do with this data? What insights you can get out of this data? And what activities are to be performed to make this data usable? Because as we saw, this data looks like this, there will be text files will look like this. So, naturally it is not expected that any human user with millions of such entries will be able to get some meaningful insight out of this, but data is there. So, you can you should try your level best to get some insight. In fact, this kind of analysis of two important terms are associated with this. First one is your web usage mining. This is the weblog basically expresses how the website is being used. So, mining this data, analyzing this data using various statistical and optimization tools is called web usage mining. And another term is also associated with this. This data gets generated by the browser clicks. If the user clicks on links, it gets generated. So, this kind of analysis is also called clickstream analysis. Now, let us just have a look at the web usage mining process. What is this web usage mining process? You have this log data may be coming from multiple sources. By multiple sources we mean your web server, your organization's web server, you may not, usually companies will not be maintaining a single web server. Nobody wants a single point failure. If the web server fails, you are disconnected. So, naturally people will be having alternative arrangements, and to avoid failure you will be having a number of maybe mirror servers. Okay. So, from getting the data application web and application server data from all these mirrored locations is the first task. Okay. Then this data gets pre-processed. So, this pre-processed data, pre-processing involves data cleaning, identifying page views, sessionizing the data. We will be knowing about sessionization later on little bit in a little bit more elaborate manner, but right now let me tell you one thing. First, in the context of web browsing, sessions can be considered in two ways. First, client sessions, then server sessions, both of course with respect to the client only. By client session we mean from the beginning of when you open your web browser till you close your web browser, whatever activities you do, it may not be restricted to one site. It can be you can open multiple tabs, then each tab you do various activities. So, from the opening instance of the browser till you close the browser, whatever activities you do is termed as a client session. And out of this client session, if a particular website, let us say, sets a cookie, that cookie can capture some details about the client session. Next, when you make multiple requests to a server, you make something called a server session from your first request till your last request, that is called a server session. So, when we are talking about the sessionization, it is with respect to server session. Sessionization is a difficult task because HTTP is a stateless protocol. If you connect to HTTP for the first time, when you come out, the server actually forgets you. It does not have any data regarding you. When you again go for the next time, you are recognized as a new request. In fact, to overcome this. Cookies are a method to overcome this, but basically it is sessionization is about uniquely identifying each session, that will be through cookie or through something else, that will be shortly seeing. There are many, it will be done heuristically only. Then data integration, as I was telling, from various sources data will come. Then is your data transformation, bringing this data, the text data that you saw just now, this text data into a form, so that some processing is possible. So, to make this processing possible, you have to bring it to some form and put it in a, possibly put it in a database. And while doing these activities of pre-processing, the knowledge about your site structure and domain knowledge about the area in which you are trying to conduct your experiment with are input to both data preparation phase and pattern discovery phase. Okay. So, after this data pre-processing is over, during pattern discovery, many on this cleaned data, many web usage mining techniques are applied, like transaction clustering, page view clustering, correlation analysis, association rule mining, sequential pattern mining. Those tools and techniques are applied to generate the patterns. These patterns are further analyzed to build user behavior models. Okay. So, not only these patterns, but in general your domain knowledge and the site, your idea on the site structure also helps you in web usage mining process. Thank you very much.